come in, come in. Oh. Wading past precariously balanced piles of books here. Now, I wanted to come have a look up at these shelves here. All this double shelving. It's my dear old Tennyson. These are the set of John Donne's sermons that I bought in the early 80s when I was doing my PhD on him. But this is what I'm after. This rather tattered copy of The Lord of the Rings, which was the one that my parents had, and from which they read to me. And my father started reading. I think we got through basically the first book. Then he let us read it on for ourselves. Settle down. This is a very nice. This is this lovely Jason Patrick pipe that he gave me, and some Elizabethan mixture. But Peterson's Elizabethan mixture. So I thought it might be nice to go back to Rivendell. We made our first visit to Rivendell in The Hobbit, of course, but we'd come there with a newer, kind of higher seriousness, greater heights and depths and beauty, a different kind of prose, and indeed poetry when we come to it in Lord of the Rings. And they've been through such difficulty and danger, what with the riders at the Prancing Pony, and before that the Barrow Wights. So and then there's the great scene at the Ford of Bruinen, and Frodo wounded on Weathertop and only just making it. And you may remember the wonderful opening of the chapter Many Meetings, which opens the two Rivendell chapters in book 2. It's the opening of book 2. I've got it marked here with a strip of cedar that somebody gave me for pipe lighting. Anyway, you remember the lovely scene. This is a scene, I think, that the film gets really well. Frodo woke and found himself lying in bed. At first he thought that he had slept late after a long unpleasant dream that still hovered on the edge of memory. Or perhaps he had been ill. But the ceiling looked strange. It was flat. It had dark beams richly carved. He lay a little while longer, looking at patches of sunlight on the wall and listening to the sound of a waterfall. "Where am I, and what is the time?" he said aloud to the ceiling. "In the house of Elrond, and it's 10 o'clock in the morning," said a voice. "It's the morning of October the 24th, if you want to know." "Gandalf!" cried Frodo, sitting up. There was the old wizard, sitting in a chair by the open window, and that introduces this beautiful chapter, which gives us a place, as it were, imaginatively to rest and recuperate, and also then draw more deeply on the great threads of story that will take us forward to the adventures beyond Rivendell. But that's not the passage I wanted to read you. The passage I wanted to read you is in a particular part of Rivendell, which I have to say would be my favourite. It's where I would hang out if I were at Rivendell, and it's where I do, in a sense, hang out in my imagination. It's called the Hall of Fire, not only because a fire is always kept there, and doubtless there's fire kindled in the bowls of their elven pipes, but it's the place of song and storytelling. And Tolkien gives us an astonishing piece of prose, almost prose poetry, which tells you everything you need to know about what he thinks about language and especially poetry itself. It's a description of Frodo in an almost heightened consciousness, almost a kind of dreamlike state, about the effect that song and story and tale has on him. And in fact, it's a kind of partner piece to what I read you the other day when Frodo and Sam are in the most awful fix, and, you know, they're suddenly encouraged by thinking about stories and being in stories, and they suddenly realise that the lady's starglass that Arwen had given them, which had the light of Earendil's star, and Elbereth having put that, the great goddess, in the star, and of course Earendil's star is the Silmaril, so they realise they're still, or one of the three Silmarils, they're still part of that great arc of story. Well, it's only when you reread The Lord of the Rings after reading that, and then you come to this passage, that you realise it's been prepared for, because Bilbo is given the task, as it were, or takes upon himself the task of telling in poetry part of the story of how the star, that was also the Silmaril, got there. And but it's preceded, as I say, by, I think, one of the most beautiful accounts of what it's like to be caught up and enchanted in the spell of great writing, the spell of poetry, the magic of it. So Frodo was left to himself for a while, for Sam had fallen asleep. He was alone and felt rather forlorn, though all about him the folk of Rivendell were gathered. But those near him were silent, intent upon the music and the voices and the instruments. They gave no heed to anything else. So it's quite an unpromising start. But everything changes with the short sentence, Frodo began to listen. So here we go. Frodo began to listen. At first, the beauty of the melodies and the interwoven words in the elven tongue, even though he understood them little, held him in a spell. And as soon as he began to attend to them, as it held him in a spell, as soon as he began to attend to them. Here's the great passage. Almost it seemed that the words took shape, and visions of far lands and bright things that he had never yet imagined opened out before him, and the firelit hall became like a golden mist above seas of foam that sighed upon the margins of the world. Then the enchantment became more dreamlike, until he felt that an endless river of swelling gold and silver was flowing over him, too multitudinous for its pattern to be comprehended. It became part of the throbbing air about him, and it drenched and drowned him. Swiftly he sank under its shining weight into a deep realm of sleep. But it's not really sleep, it's kind of altered consciousness. There he wandered long in a dream of music that turned into running water, and then suddenly into a voice. It seemed to be the voice of Bilbo, chanting verses. Faint at first, then clearer ran the words. Earendil was a mariner that tarried in Arvenian. He built a boat of timber felled in Nimbrethel to journey in. Her sails he wove of silver fair, of silver were her lanterns made. Her prow was fashioned like a swan, and light upon her banners laid. You hear this wonderful rhythm of the poem is extraordinary. The internal rhymes, timber felled, Nimbrethel, silver fair, silver were. Like a swan, light upon. In panoply of ancient kings, in chained rings he armoured him. His shining shield was scored with runes to ward all wounds and harm from him. His bow was made of dragon horn, his arrows shorn of ebony. Of silver was his habergeon, his scabbard of chalcedony. And so he's armed. And then he sails off. And then comes the wonderful thing where Elwing, his beloved, comes to him with the Silmaril. There flying Elwyn came to him, and flame was in the darkness lit, more bright than light of diamond, the fire upon her carcanet. The Silmaril she bound on him, and crowned him with the living light, and dauntless then with burning brow he turned his prow, and in the night from other world beyond the sea, there strong and free a storm arose, a wind of power in Tarmanel. By paths that seldom mortal goes, his boat it bore with biting breath, as might of death across the grey and long forsaken seas distressed. From east to west he passed away. And of course this then becomes the great journey that takes him, as it were, along the straight road, away from the bent world, takes him in the end to Valinor, to Eldamar, to the Undying Lands. And there, of course, they build the new ship for him. And the Silmaril is taken and bound upon the prow of the ship. A ship then new they built for him of mithril and of elven glass, with shining prow. No shaven oar nor sail she bore on silver mast. The Silmaril as lantern light and banner bright with living flame, to gleam thereon by Elbereth herself was set, who thither came, and wings immortal made for him, and laid on him undying doom, to sail the shoreless skies, and come behind the light of sun and moon. So Elbereth, of course, is the name that's called upon in, almost a kind of inspiration. Elbereth Githaniel, he says, in his deepest and darkest moment, and then there is light. And so over Middle-earth he passed, and he becomes a constellation in the sky, and that's the same constellation from the light of whose star the light is caught in the lady's glass that she gives, and which Frodo bears, and which later he bears instead of the ring, and he himself, in a sense, becomes a vessel of light. So it's glorious poetry, but it's almost more extraordinary the preface to that poetry. The way he starts to attend, the words took shape. They stop being words, they become visions, and bright things he had never yet imagined opened out before him. I mean, this is in fact our own experience, especially for the first time, of taking up the Lord of the Rings and reading it. This has happened to us. We've been held in a spell. Almost it seems the words took shape, and visions of far lands and bright things he had never yet imagined opened out before him, just as it does when we read Tolkien. And then, of course, the firelit hall became a golden mist above seas of foam that sighed upon the margins of the world. There's a memory there in Tolkien's poetic writing of Keats's magic casements opened on perilous seas in fairy lands forlorn. It's almost the same rhythm and the same idea. And that's really the transition that I find genuinely miraculous and magical about words. It's what, in my own small way, I hope I might get a little bit of in my Arthurian poetry, where you start where you are, in the firelit hall of the book-lined study, and you attend to the words, and then with the words comes music, and then with the music comes vision, and then suddenly the words themselves are no longer there. They've been transformed into this golden mist above seas of foam. They become an endless river of swelling gold and silver, and they become part of something that is too multitudinous for its pattern to be comprehended. He's borrowed multitudinous there, of course, from the Shakespeare, who coined it, the multitudinous seas in Carnarvon. It's a really extraordinarily experience of essentially imaginative and spiritual rapture, and that's exactly what great poetry provides. And I have never seen in prose by anybody a better account of the actual experience of having your mind transfigured by high poetry, and all in the wonderful Hall of Fire in Rivendell, in Elrond's kingdom. Anyway, here we are, not in a Hall of Fire, but in a book-lined study, and it's good to be with you. I may be away for a bit. I hope we can meet up again soon, but I'm off for a holiday in Switzerland, the place that actually inspired Tolkien as well, as it happens. But you can drop round and see me after I'm back. Good to see you. Thanks for coming round.